What is the sure-shot evidence that humans stepped on the moon? Multiple countries showing evidence of the landers who have no vested interest in proving NASA went to the moon. China, for example. I believe India also took photos of Apollo landing sites from orbit. The fact that Soviets never disputed it. They had most to gain if USA was revealed to be a liar, and they never did. They must have had spies in NASA. They would most certainly know and would have revealed it immediately or by now. There are retroreflectors on the moon used to measure the distance from Earth. If you had a laser and receiver, you could also measure this distance. The Soviet observatories could follow the astronauts on the trip. US and USSR are racing to the moon. They are longtime competitors in pretty much everything. The US gets there first. Do you think the USSR just said, "Okay, you won even though you faked it"? No, they would have tried to prove it was fake so they could win the space race. Our mortal enemy at the time isn't going to play along with a fake story by the US to make the US look better than USSR. Russia and China world say so if they had evidence. The Soviet Union had the technology to track the moon missions in progress and would not have let the Americans get away with faking the landing. The photographs. The common claim is that those photos were shot in a studio. But it would have been technologically impossible to do so. The light source needed to produce the stark and defined shadows you see in the images would have needed to be impossibly large and powerful. In other words, the only light source it could have been is the sun. And obviously digital doctoring of images wasn't possible yet either. The fact that no one from NASA blew the whistle and said, "Yep, it's fake." The fact that you can take a laser, shoot it at specific lunar coordinates and get a bounce back in about 17 seconds from a reflector left on the moon. How about the fact that we did? I know that this sounds circular, but there's such an immense amount of evidence. 300,000 people worked on it from several different countries. The documents exist. The USA was in a space race with a hostile power. The technology was made and we now use it in everyday appliances. People saw it happen with their telescopes. There's so much evidence that any reasonable person would just take it for a fact. The same way we take it for a fact that the USA has a president. If it was a conspiracy, it had to be so elaborate that literally every other person in the world, except me, knows about it. At which point it doesn't matter. Might as well live in the Matrix. Video evidence, witness testimony, equipment left behind, footprints, etc. The lighting is also important, as the technology to light a stage such that all the shadows would point in the same direction did not exist at the time, and thus it would have required actual sunlight without Photoshop available at the time. This means that the stage would have had to be outdoors against a black, starless sky with no wind or other interference. What's more, too much information about the landing would be almost impossible to lie about. Every single person working on the project would have had to be sworn to secrecy with enough threats and bribery that even decades later none of them are willing to admit that it was a lie, despite the fact that many of the people in charge of those threats and bribes are now long dead, or at least no longer in power. In addition, the Soviet Union would have had no reason to maintain the American lie, since exposing them would have been a huge political victory. The Soviets had already led the charge for a while at the time, getting most of the goals for spaceflight done before the Americans did. If they exposed the Americans' only victory, the grand prize of the space race, as a fake, it would be a political achievement comparable to actually putting a man on the moon themselves. There's no one thing that irrefutably proves it to naysayers. But by aggregating several pieces of evidence, one can convince many naysayers and conspiracy theorists to grudgingly accept defeat. I use that term deliberately. Defeat. You won't convince them to change their belief that it's a hoax. You'll just get them to a point where they can no longer argue with you. We left mirrors there. Apollo 11, Apollo 14, and have bounced lasers back to Earth by using them. But humanity has also delivered mirrors and other stuff to the moon without putting people on it. So, it's not sure-shot evidence, despite the analog negatives that were printed in newspapers, magazines and scientific journals back in the 1970s, and have been subsequently digitized into internet images, showing the trampled regolith next to the deployed mirrors on the moon's surface. Same with the grainy telescope, satellite photos taken of the Apollo landing sites via equipment launched into orbit by various international space organizations. It has been too easy to fake a photograph for decades. Some people use this fact as evidence to reject good faith data provided by multiple scientific organizations in multiple countries, some of whom are more adversaries than friends. And yet, these scientific organizations, despite their political differences, corroborate the claim that humans, Americans, even walked on the moon. You could take some people, launch them into space, land them on the moon, stuff them into a spacesuit and push them out the airlock. Let them fill a Ziploc baggie with regolith and moon rocks, and then bring them back to Earth, and they would still deny that the experience was real. Probably blame it on a combination of drugs and amusement park technology, all while still claiming that the Earth is flat. Personally, I like to follow Randall Munroe's line of argumentation on that one. If NASA had been willing to fake the moon landing, they would have faked another great accomplishment by now. Source: Buzz Aldrin punching the guy that said he didn't. The fact that the Soviets confirmed the moon landings. There's tons of evidence, but idiots will make up any excuse, no matter how ridiculous, to deny it's so at some point. You just need to slide Occam's razor across their throats to shut them up. But okay, here's the real answer on how you deflate people like this. Ask them, specifically, what they don't believe we were capable of doing. They'll say something flippant like, land on the moon, so you ask them, do you think we were incapable of making the thrusters that we needed? Or is it the landing gear? Or is it something else? From there, a simple Google search will pull up information on how exactly that aspect was accomplished. If the person is sincere in their disbelief, you'll usually rinse and repeat this 3 or 4 times before they get really frustrated that there isn't a single aspect of this hoax that isn't totally technologically feasible. They'll say, yeah, but what about, and mention angles of light and cameras and stuff. But none of that is evidence. So keep them focused on the actual mission and every detail that was necessary to accomplish it. One thing that isn't mentioned much is the fact that there were a total of 6 missions that landed on the moon. 4 of them are still alive to tell you about it. We can bounce a laser off the rover.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Eracast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.